Hey. Saw a short today about whether or not you're ready to read the Book of the Law. Let's watch it.
Are you ready to read The Book of the Law by Aleister Crowley? So, I've said before that I don't think it's the first Thelema book or Crowley book you should read. I think you should read Liber ABA first. So, honestly, ideally, you read Liber ABA first, and then you read the Book of the Law. It's actually within Liber ABA towards the back, so you have some introductory context, and then you can jump into it. But otherwise, if you don't want to do that, I think once you have a little bit of a rudimentary knowledge of what Thelema represents and what Western esotericism is, once you have that foundation, then I think reading the Book of the Law is appropriate. Now, if you do just want to be ambitious and read it with no occult knowledge, that's cool too, but just know a lot of it's going to go over your head and anticipate that. Don't go into the Book of the Law expecting to read some digestible, beginner-friendly content, because it is far from that. Just make sure your expectations are right, and know that also the Book of the Law is not the only thing Crowley ever wrote. There's a lot of other work out there, and it looks so different from the Book of the Law, so just be prepared. Are you ready to read the Book of the Law by Aleister Crowley?
Yes, that's what I usually delete in the jump cuts. Are you digging now? Are you picking up a new hobby? I totally approve. I first read the Book of the Law relatively blind. It wasn't totally blind, but I knew very little about the occult sciences, for lack of a better way to phrase it. So I couldn't disagree more. And the reason I disagree is in this little book here. So, Georgina Rose mainly says that we shouldn't begin by reading the Book of the Law because we won't understand it without a really solid background knowledge in the occult. And she's right, we won't, but I think there's a fundamental error in thinking we ought to understand it, especially the first time we read it. The first reason I say that is a passage from Liber Legis itself. There is a great danger in me, for who doth not understand these runes shall make a great miss. He shall fall down into the pit called Because, and there he shall perish with the dogs of reason. Now a curse upon Because and his kin. May Because be accursed forever. If will stops and cries why, invoking Because, then will stops and does not. If power asks why, then is power weakness. Also reason is a lie, for there is a factor infinite and unknown, and all their words are askew wise. Enough of Because, may he be damned for a dog. Which really implies that understanding every line, every allusion, every sensible notion encoded into the book isn't really the goal. It's always good to understand the reason behind things despite the profound condemnation of reason in the Book of the Law itself. But it is unwise to believe that reason is the crux that undergirds all understanding and all knowing. It isn't, and it should be obvious that it isn't, because there are plenty of things that we know without having reasoned about it for a moment. We know when it's warm or cold without thinking. We know when we're happy or sad without thinking. Understanding the intellectual illusions in a work of poetry is distancing yourself from the emotional and spiritual lessons that go far beyond words, which, given some of Crowley's other work that explicitly calls out the limitations of language, I think anyone who actually has meaningful experience with the Book of the Law ought to know that you don't need to understand it to read it, and in fact that may be beneficial. When you don't understand the book, it serves more as a mirror. You will respond negatively with disgust or hatred or anger or aversion to certain passages, and those passages are important to you for one reason or another. I can't tell you how they're important to you, but I know that I responded in a lot of different ways to a lot of different passages that I didn't understand. I only responded to those passages the way that I did because I did not understand them fully. And because I did not understand them fully, because I responded in that way, I was better able to understand myself and to untangle the threads in myself that were holding me back from doing my true will. And this book is full of various different things, some of them boring, some of them tedious, some of them disgusting, some of them delightful, some of them comforting even. What we're drawn towards and what we're repelled by tell us so much about ourselves that I would not want anyone to taint that experience of self-discovery with the knowledge found in Liber ABA before they actually opened the book and read it for themselves. it is poetry after all. And while thinking about poetry is a great thing, it is also a medium that is meant to be felt. The connotations, the associations, these are a huge part of the message of poetry. And if you aren't allowing yourself to be swept away with that, if you're thinking about what the specific words mean in fine detail as opposed to being swept along by the sounds and the feelings evoked, then you're not reading poetry, and you needn't ever read poetry. You should just stick to treatises. And I love treatises. I have a couple over here, and I only put books on this shelf that I actually love. But there's also poetry. Poetry, literature, philosophy, even scientific treatises. All here. All important. But if you try to understand everything intellectually, you are going to miss the single most distinctive element of poetry, which is the feelings. This book, even more true for this one than others, because it basically works as an emotional and conceptual strobe light system. The disgusting is placed next to the divine. The elevated is placed next to the depraved. And the incredibly intellectual is placed directly next to the ecstatic moans that come from physical intimacy. All of it right next to each other, quite deliberately, or so it seems. This has an emotional strobe light effect. You go from one emotion to the other, to the opposite, over and over again, which allows you both to have a better idea of where you lack connection to your emotional self, as well as allowing you to synthesize those alternating emotions to reach the unity that is the ultimate core of divinity that Thelema so often points towards. You also get this in the conceptual, intellectual juxtapositions, though that was also done just about as well by the Zen Koan writers whenever they did their thing. You find that same tradition here with the intellectual concepts placed side by side, but also in the emotional concepts that are placed side by side in direct contrast, so that you're brought from one extreme to the other, to the other, to the other. If you're approaching the book as an intellectual exercise, you won't experience any of that. And if you don't experience any of that, then you haven't actually read the book, not properly. Especially intellectuals, and I do think Thelema attracts a lot of intellectuals and a lot of nerds. We tend to want to rationalize everything. We are naturally dogs of reason, or I certainly was. The passage that I read you from this book earlier was one of the ones that offended me most, because my entire life was spent asking questions and figuring out the answers. And I retain a deep-seated skepticism that is rooted in my love of asking and answering questions. And that's wonderful. It really is, but it's not everything, and you will not be able to feel and encounter God or even yourself on a visceral level if you are stuck in that headspace all the time. So you don't need to understand. Read, feel, hear the sounds, and pay attention to your responses to the words as well as the sentences and the juxtapositions. And you'll learn about yourself at minimum, and perhaps about God as well. The book itself, at the very end, the book itself says, "The book of the law shall be printed beautifully in red ink and black upon beautiful paper made by hand, and to each man and woman that thou meetest, were it but to dine or to drink at them, it is the law to give. Then they shall chance to abide in this bliss, or no. It is no odds. Do this quickly." It doesn't say you have to read a huge commentary. It doesn't say you have to study the occult or esoteric religious practices to understand it. It said, this is the law. This is the book to read and to give. And I'm quite glad that it's the first book that I ever read in Thelema, because I don't think I would have been quite so delighted if it had come later. You don't need to understand. Pursue the reason beyond reason first. Then, once you understand that, everything else will follow. Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. Love is the law, love under will.